Starting out.
All right, everyone, welcome to Scholarly Selection. My name is Len. I work here at the museum. I just want to do a quick thank you for coming. Also want to point out that I left a couple of these explorers, which are our newsletters, so you can see what new exhibits that we have and other programs that we've got coming up. We just installed 2 new exhibits. The first one is Skate, Rings, Derbies, and Discos in Washington Skate History. It is up on display right now. It's a really fun exhibit if you have the time. Go ahead and check it out. We're going to do some pretty fun programming with it in April. And we've also installed Resilience, Sensei's Sense of Legacy, which is also open. So hopefully you all have a little bit of time to go up and take a look at that. Before the program starts, I would like to acknowledge that the Washington State Historical Society is located on the lands of the Puyallup people, and we pay respect to their elders, past and present. So right now I'd like to call up Libby, a teaching professor at UW-T, and she'll tell you a little bit more about scholarly selection. Thank you.
Thanks, Len. Thank you so much for coming. Just quickly, scholarly selection started, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago now, and time's gone by really fast. I started it so that we could bring scholarship from our faculty and students to the public. And that's what we're doing. We try to keep it a little more casual than academic conferences often are. And so we do these about 6 times a year following the academic schedule. So just keep posted on the website or talks. So we got 2 more this year. But I'm really, really happy to welcome my colleague and friend, Sarah Chavez, here today. You can see the title of our talk on the screen, so I won't repeat it. But just a little bit about Sarah. So she teaches creative writing and Latinx and Chicanics focused courses at University of Washington, which of course is right across the street from the museum. And she serves as a poetry coordinator for the Best Annette anthology, and she's also a very well published scholar. So you're here to hear from Sarah, so I will duck out and bring Sarah up to the microphone.
Thank you, Libby, and thank you, Len, for having us here, and thank you to the Washington State History Museum, and please ignore my typo that's on there that says Historical Society. I don't know why I did that. I didn't do that. Gremlins in my laptop. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here. This is a topic that's pretty close to my heart. And I feel pretty privileged that I'm able to have it be part of my scholarship as well. So it is Elegies, Obits, and Honoring Life and Writing, a creative exploration of love. And I have my notes in 2 different places, so I'm going to be toggling between them. So I have a quote here from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie from her recently published memoir, Notes on Grief. It says, "Grief is a cruel kind of education. You learn how much grief is about language, about the failure of language, and the grasping." So I wanted to start with a little bit about conceptions of death. So I'll give a little bit of an outline, some definitions for elegies, obituaries, and eulogies, and the difference between them. But we don't have any of those things if we don't have death, and we don't have life without death. So they're so intimately connected. And there's this lovely quote from Garcia Lorca: "Those who are afraid of death will carry it on their shoulders." And you know, I love the way this quote sort of frames the thinking of death, because in Western culture, there are multiple ways. And I would say there's sort of two almost like binary ways. We have this fear of death. We don't want to talk about it. We do everything medically possible to like stave it off as long as we can. You know, we have a culture that doesn't prepare its young or its elders in ways that think about death as part of the living process. And so the idea that someone who's afraid would carry it on their shoulders is interesting to me, because we all have it, but we carry it differently. And when I think about death, I also think about Halloween, which is my most favorite holiday. It is magical. And my partner and I, which I didn't tell him I was going to be mentioning him at least twice during this talk, sorry. I meant to warn you when I forgot. We both love Halloween, and we start in September. And one of the ways that we celebrate is by watching movies. So here's his Halloween. This is, so it's, you know, like murderous entities and like hell and fear. And I will admit, these are great movies, and I watch these movies too. However, my Halloween tends to look a little bit more like this. So dancing skeletons, colorful afterlife, wonder. And I love that there are even these two options. So Halloween, of course, is a modern outcropping of ancient Celtic pagan traditions of some Samhain. I've been mispronouncing it for years, and I think I just finally pronounced it correctly. And it's connected to death in that it was believed that as the seasons were moving from like life and growth and the harvest, and then as things died, moving into, you know, fall into winter, the veil between the living and the dead became blurred or thinned. And so the living and dead could sort of intermingle, and the dead could visit. And then, of course, you know, colonial Catholicism then says, no, we have to scare away the ghosts. And then we get things like All Souls Day, as they try to sort of repurpose and rebrand Samhain. And despite that colonialism that sort of takes death as something to be feared, something that controls our actions in life, we still get sort of like Latin American and other tribal cultures honoring death and honoring and welcoming the dead into our spaces. I think a lot about Dia de los Muertos, which we have, you know, in football. I feel like, you know, all of a sudden people are like, oh, that's what those masks were about. And, you know, to the point where we put up altars and like literally invite them. So these two, like the fear versus the celebration and the bringing in. And in particular, what I like about these, the three movies, I just like those dancing skeletons, they're super fun. But what I like about those movies is it is the connection to love that connects us to the dead, and that remains that like strain through the veil between the living and the dead, is how strong love is. So a little bit of early context in terms of like how I came to think so much about death and grieving, because despite the fact that it affects all of us, not all of us are doing research on it or having it sort of at the forefront. So even when I was young, I sort of had this interest in like romantic notions of death. And in a way, it was actually sort of nice that my teachers had introduced us to Edgar Allan Poe, because very early in my life, when I was in 8th grade, so when I was 12, 13, we lost a family friend to suicide. And I remember, I have such a clear memory of sitting on my mom's bed and crying and just really not being able to comprehend that I would not see that person anymore. And it was through poetry that I felt like I had an outlet for thinking about this, and an outlet for being okay with being sad. So I love how super emo this poem is, right? So that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing like Annabelle Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than me, of many far wiser than me, and neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. So emo, like I just picture him sitting on like a crag and it's like kind of damp and raining. He's like, that's right, you can't sever my love. And that's beautiful. And I think what that taught me was that A, it's okay to write about it. B, it's okay to think about it. And C, it's okay to keep that connection. That even when we're sad, we are remembering people. Which is one reason why I think I can sort of continually turn to poetry. And in fact, while I was working on this presentation earlier today, I was thinking about, this family friend who died to suicide. He was actually terminally ill and didn't want to go. He didn't want to put his family through what he knew they were going to go through because of his illness. And that actually reminded me of this time. So he was the custodian at the school that I went to, that my mother also was the secretary for. And so during the summers, my sister and I would just like walk around with him, like help vacuum things. And, he was getting free labor out of us. And we thought it was like a game. But he was really wonderful and very loving. We called him Uncle Larry. And during the school year, if I got sick, he would come check on me. And whenever I didn't feel well, if my stomach hurt, he'd come in and say, do you want me to drop the vacuum on your foot? And I'm like, what? No, I want you to drop the vacuum. And he's like, no, it'll cure your stomach. And I was like, you're messing with me. He's like, no, your foot will hurt so bad. You won't remember that your stomach hurts. So I really love that memory because it's the idea that we can distract ourselves from pain. But yeah, so especially sort of after his loss and like his humor, I was able to write about it because I had these examples of expressing pain mixed with joy. So I was messaging my mom to check on some of these dates, but I did like a sort of timeline of all of the deaths in my life that were very close to me. So there have definitely been more deaths, extended family, teachers, but these are all people that were very close to me, that were in my space. And you can see in the timeline that they're kind of bunched up a little bit, but particularly in that second line between 2019 and 2020. So I experienced quite a bit of heavy, very close loss during the pandemic, none of which had to do with COVID-19, but because COVID-19 was happening, it changed our ability to mourn and be with those people who were sick. And so even though I've actually been writing about death, I've been writing elegies in the form of epistles, which I might talk a little bit about later. In terms of like researching the performance of death, I didn't really think about that as much until the pandemic, which I'll talk a little bit more. But here's like a mildly depressing timeline. But I did learn how to do the timeline thing in Google Slides. Plus, see, sadness, overline. So before I talk much more about sort of like the research I'm beginning, which I am in the very early stages, though I've been doing quite a bit of writing. This is both in academic and creative endeavor, which is what a lot of my work is. It's a lot of writing poetry, but also sort of conceptualizing like why am I doing this? And thinking about scholars like Bell Hooks and Mariana Zamora and writers who are like, my art is not disconnected from my analytical thinking. It is not disconnected from my everyday life. Those things are intimately connected. And so a couple definitions. So elegy is a song or poem of lamentation for the dead and a mourning poem. First writing about elegies appears in 1521, so of course we have much longer than that. In poetic tradition, it was understood to be an ancient Greek metrical form, traditionally written in response to the death of a person or a group. And I think importantly, it had sort of three stages of loss: the lament, so expression of grief and sorrow. 2, praise and adoration, so idealizing the dead, and then 3, consolation and solace. So making the speaker of the poem, making themselves and others, the reader, feel better about it. So like, oh, I'm so sad. They were so great. It's okay. And so traditional elegy examples, if you want to look them up later, are like In Memory of Yeats by Auden, Carrying Comfort by Gerard Manley Hopkins, O Captain by Walt Whitman, and In Memoriam by Lord Tennyson. So there are thousands more, but these are sort of like, if you were to do some like Western canonical class, these would definitely be in there. So eulogies, however, so elegy is a poem and it's conceived of as art, and it is about the emotional expression of the death of someone. The eulogy is a speech. So it is a speech that's in commendation of the character and services of a person. So it's a public audience. It's often a formal gathering like a wake or a funeral or memorial service. And it's often sort of saying the kind of important things about someone. These were the successes of their life. They were great parents, sibling, they were wonderful teachers. So really kind of talking up their positives. And then some famous eulogies, if you wanted to go read some later, was Senator Jacob Javits' elegy for John F. Kennedy. Maya Angelou's eulogy for Coretta Scott King, which is beautiful. And then I was on this website where I was just like Googling famous eulogies, and Captain Kirk's eulogy for Spock in Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan came up. I have to admit, is it good? Okay. I have to rewatch. I watched it a long time ago, so I'm gonna have to rewatch that. And then, but the last one I remember very clearly, which was Walter and the Dude's eulogy for Danny and Nick Lebowski. So I love that. Firstly, there are so many lists of famous elegies. Secondly, that they are that they're connecting like literary, political, and like movements. And then lastly, the obituary. So the obituary is where we register deaths. That's where they're recorded. So specifically in an announcement, usually in the newspaper or similar publications, certainly on social media now, and in online magazines. In fact, it's actually quite expensive to get an obituary in a newspaper. I know because I've written 4 obituaries in the last few years. And I was like, I'm sorry, how much was that? We still did it, you know. But so it's fascinating that the obituary then is very outward facing. So if the elegy is this like emotional writing, and the eulogy is this sort of formal commemorating, the obituary is like, here's when they died, here's how they died, and here's where you can go to the funeral, or here where you can send flowers. So we have these ways of thinking about the information that's going to be helpful for us culturally. I was gonna Google famous obituaries, and then I was like, or you can be, I think we're actually inundated with them. I was visiting with my father at the beginning of February, and he and his friend, like, both days were like, oh, did you hear that so-and-so died? Did you hear that so-and-so died? They just like get obituaries in their like Facebook feeds all the time. And maybe some of that is about, you know, their age range, but it's also a little bit about what we share, what we choose to share in community spaces like, you know, Facebook and Instagram. So, I love, I'm moving into kind of what I was talking about a little bit before about the performance of grief and mourning. So there's this quote by Derrida that he wrote after the death of one of, you know, a great thinker and a peer and a friend of his at the time. From what I read, they had sort of a contentious relationship. But he actually has a lot of writings about obituaries and death and our conceptions of death and how we share mourning. But he says, like, speaking is impossible, but so too would be silence or absence or refusal to share one's sadness. So despite how impossible it feels and how much words fail us, we're still compelled toward this kind of sharing. So, like a lot of art, we're making choices. And so, especially if we're thinking about elegies and their connection and or differences between obituaries and eulogies, there really is this sense of performance of moving. And I was especially struck by it during the pandemic. I think about performance a lot. So performance is actually one of my, it has been one of my most consistent and original research topics, except originally I was researching and writing about the performance of gender, performance of ethnicity, and performance of socioeconomic class. As a queer Chicana from a working class background, navigating the university, I was like, oh my God, I'm not acting right. I am supposed to be acting some other way and I don't understand. So I need to watch other people, see how they're doing it so that I can somehow acculturate into this space. And that really got me thinking about performance studies. So performance studies explores cultural, social, and political dimensions of performances as a form of communication. So it's not so much performance like I'm an actor, I'm, you know, putting on a show that's false and being someone else. It's trying to find how you fit into a space and how to signal authenticity through performing and through communication. Like, what is going to communicate accurately? What's going to communicate well? How do I hold on to some aspect of myself and acculturate? So some people really kind of wrestle with the idea of performance, but you know, as I tell my students, like, we're performing all the time, right? I made a choice to wear this very awesome t-shirt today because I'm talking about obituaries and eulogies. You know, like, we make choices about how we cut our hair and how we, what kind of language we use. We code switch in spaces, you know, how we speak to our families versus how we speak to our friends versus how we are at work. And the same is very true with mourning. And I realized I meant to say in the other slide, I don't think it's worth going back. Oh, actually, yes, it is. So I'll talk, I had a quote from Derrida, and I'll talk very briefly about Mourning, Diary of Mourning by Bolden Barnes. but those have been really integral to my thinking. And so I am by no means, like, I'm certainly not the worst person. I was able to entering into this conversation with other scholars, but from like a different perspective and from a post side of pandemic experience, where our understanding of death is not just personal, but we watched it unfold. Oops, I'm going backwards. So I was going to share one of my poems. So I'll read two of my own creative works. One now and then one at the very end, when I start talking about my deep research. But so when I came here to UW, which was in 2018, I started, you have to reintroduce yourself, and including like all at, like, oh, you're half Mexican, do you speak Spanish? Like, are you this? Do you know this? And and so you're like re-navigating. And I am half Mexican and half white. And I was just thinking about, like, if I could just put all of this into, like, I just was sort of like, I needed to just speak. So I have this speaker, half-breed Helene. I just like to be alliteration. And I started writing these poems, partially with a very generous support of the Tacoma Obits Create. I began it talking about ethnicity and the performance of ethnicity, especially in new spaces, and especially with not people of color who are expecting a certain kinds of performance, or certain kinds of fairness, or certain kinds of intelligence. And then 2 years later, a year and a half to 2 years later, I started experiencing all this death, and the poems just slowly morphed into being about mourning. So here is, I'm going to read, I tried to get it up here, but it ended up being too much of a thing. So I'm just going to read the, so Half-Breed Helene begins her funeral playlist. No one could agree what música her abuelo liked. Not mariachi, not anymore, not after Sylvia's quince and the beer and the unpleasantness with Pio Freddy. Not classical music, it's boring. Not country, at least not commercial country, maybe Mojado country, pero no California back roads oaky country. Lo que era his favorite candy, favorite color, favorite cookie, mood, time of day. Dozens of primos, tias and tia, and who really knew the man? His wife in the muddy throes of dementia, his friends, muerto, his siblings, muerto, one of his sons on the brink of death. What is the loving way to honor a man with body new? Helene wants to ask the ladies at the mall he wants laughs with. Maybe the neighbor who helped trim the orange tree. Surely they know something of this man his own familia remained ignorant of. H begins to fear the day that she will die. What if someone who just knew the year she was born made a reception playlist featuring Coldplay and Summer? Maybe they'll mistake her wearing a black as an 80s goth throwback, and funeral attendees will eat random inexpensive snacks to The Cure, The Smiths. I mean, there's nothing wrong with those bands, H thinks, but they are not her favorite. She would not actively change the channel on the radio and the car, but conversely, she would not choose this music to accompany her into the afterlife. If H thinks, she makes the playlist now and leaves a note somewhere. Hopefully, someone would find it in the shoebox of her things that get saved from the trash. This way, if a bus hits her tomorrow, or maybe the next day, since she won't have time to complete this list before work, they will find it and play the music she really likes. Neutral Milk Hotel, Modest Mouse, Tori Amos, Santa Cecilia, das Cafeteras. Worse though, maybe no one knows. No one has this argument, no one rifles through her meager belongings. Maybe there is no discussion of music because there will be no reception, no rosary, no video of pictures, no one to argue what to serve because there will be no serving. Only the cold, cold ground, only darkness, only silencio, a pauper's grave, a recluse's send-off. Maybe no one knew Abuelo's favorite música, but at least someone cared that no one knew that, and maybe. So that poem is not a traditional elegy in that it is not, commemorating the dead. It's not trying to make, it's making itself feel a little bit better, but it's really about the living's experience with death and how once we experience death, it sits with us in different ways and we start to understand ourselves in the space differently. And so as I began my research, when I started writing these poems about grief, very direct, because again, I'll mention this a little bit, but I have two collections of poetry that are elegiac epistles, but I never thought about them that way. I just was talking, the speaker's just talking to someone that she loves who's died. But Victoria Chang's collection of poems, Obit, came out, and it is astounding. It is one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite books that have come out recently. And she was also dealing with death, but the death of her parents, and trying to kind of understand how to communicate and how to perform her, not just her, but like poetry's relationship to grief. And then after that, I started doing more research, and I came upon Mourning Diary by William Bartz, and then Notes on Grief by Elegies. So one of the things that 20th and 21st century poetry is doing that I appreciate so much of is they're blurring. So much like the lines between the living and the dead blur at certain times of year, elegies and poetry have been blurring these lines as well. So I have 3 poems from Victoria Chang, but I'll just read one of them because I don't want to keep us too much. But this is what they look. So they look like obituaries. They are shaped like this. And it's a lot of them, like they're very short. They have a lot of white space on the page. They have dates. So they're structured exactly like obituaries. But they do, and they contain some of the information in an obituary, but not. So I will, I'll read the first poem, My Father's Frontal Lobe. My father's frontal lobe died unpeacefully of a stroke on June 24th, 2009 at Scripps Memorial Hospital in San Diego, California. Born January 20, 1940, the frontal lobe enjoyed a good life. The frontal lobe loved being the boss. It tried to talk again, but someone put a bag over it. When the frontal lobe died, it sucked in its lips like a window and shut. At the funeral for his words, my father wouldn't stop talking, and his love passed over me, fell onto the ground that wasn't there. I could hear someone stomping their feet. The body is as confusing as language. Was the frontal lobe having a tantrum or dancing? When I took my father's phone away, his words died in the plastic coffin. at the funeral for his words. We argued about my miscarriage. It's not really a baby, he said. I ran out of words, stomped out to shake the dead baby awake. I thought of the tech who put the wand down, quietly left the room when she couldn't find the heartbeat. I understood then that darkness is falling without an end, that darkness is not the absorption of color, but the absorption of language. So this blurring that's happening in 20th and 21st century eulogies is not just the blurring of not focusing solely on the person who's died, but how their life is affecting and their death is affecting the person living, and not trying to make it feel better, and not trying to say it's okay, and not only looking at the good things, it's looking at the wholeness, the complexity of someone's life. And also Chang does these wonderful things about, like, it's the frontal lobe that died. And then in other poems, it's the mother who died, and other body parts that have died. And this is one I was potentially going to share. It's one where Victoria Chang writes a character of Victoria Chang who dies. And they often die unknowingly. They die unpeacefully. There is this just really stark, like in like the face of death, honesty. That is what's so strong about 20th and 21st century elegy. So modern elegy, according to Kevin Young in the book of the Art of Losing Poems of Grief and Healing, one modern aspect is the way in which death seems our one certainty, and yet the one thing we cannot easily discuss. And so these elegies that won't cleanly move in stages, but are mixed up and messy, they are not easy to discuss. They are rejecting the traditional movement of the elegy. And then Romanzi in Poetry of Mourning from Pretty Bikini says that the modern elegy flourishes by becoming anti-elegiac and melancholic. So it's the refusal to engage in that traditional performance of mourning into something that feels more authentic for modern time. And so some of the very clear, if you decide to go look into 20th and 21st century elegies, but some of the differences are not necessarily being interested in being consoled, not adhering to praise, and definitely doesn't follow that tried grief. And in fact, is recognizing the artificiality of modern psychologies push for us to have these linear experiences of mourning, like, well, first denial, then anger, and then when people don't experience it in that way, they feel like something is wrong with them, right? And that is how culture polices our emotions and how polices our performances. And so the modern elegy is like, let's put the brakes on that. One thing too about, one thing too about performance that I really like thinking about, and I would want to put more about this, but I would have gone in a different direction. But I'm really also thinking about the gendered performance of grief and who gets to cry and when they get to cry and how loud can they cry. Can you only have one view of what's going to come down your face? Do you get to scream? There's this really funny essay in Notes on Grief where I think she is, and that is memoir, so that is creative nonfiction, where she's saying that when she found out her father died, she like dropped to the ground and like wailed and ripped her sweater off, and she doesn't hardly remember doing any of it. But a few days later, her daughter was making fun of her and like doing an impression of her, and everyone was laughing about it, including her. She was sort of like, yep, like I went feral. And I love how it's like this heartbreaking moment. It's so unbeautiful. It's so embodied. And she can have that humorous moment with her daughter and not just be upset. Like, I feel like if I made fun of her, she would probably disown me, actually. But yeah, so that's something that I'm extra interested in. So in terms of my research, and aside from kind of this being like an introduction to these topics and to the ways in which like elegies and elegiac writing are shifting in the 20th and 21st century, I have two chapbooks that are elegiac epistles, so letters to loved one who's died, all day talking, and then like everything else we loved, which just recently came out from Portfolio Press. And then I have a full length collection of these epistles. In fact, like everything else we loved is in that full length, but with 3 other sections. And that's manuscripts under review right now. But my new research, which I have grateful support from University of Washington, Tacoma School for Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences, is called, tentatively titled, "In the Face of Mourning, Grieving and Shift in Florida, Letters and Lyrics." And part of this came from, as I'm doing this, and I'm having these poems that are like not really poems, but they're not stories, and they're not essays, and they don't want to be confined to a particular genre. I just sort of started amassing, and so I really am interested in not only like the way that people are grieving and performing their grief, but how is the art that we get to engage with performing it and inviting us to be free and different and multifaceted. So, so I will read, this will be like, I just have one slide left, and I'm gonna read a new work that is from this project. I apparently didn't open. Oh, there it is. So this is one of those letters, and it actually stems from an assignment that I gave my creative writing class. I was teaching an advanced creative nonfiction class during the pandemic. This was during the first year, when we all sort of had no idea what was happening and how long things were going to be going on. And I gave them the assignment to write an epistle, because it's one of my favorite forms, so I'll make everybody do it. They always love it though, which is good. And so I tend to write alongside them. And so this was something that came out of that. So it's a letter, dear abuelo and grandpa. So grandpa is like my white grandpa. There's only one hummingbird coming to the bright red bulbous feeder I position in the yard. It's outside the window of the kitchen nook, a weird little room just off the kitchen proper by the back door. So that when I check my email, drink my coffee in the morning, I would be able to watch them place those impossibly thin, fragile beaks into the plastic flowers at the base. Dee bought a feeder too, which sits outside his office window. He bought organic, naturally dyed food for his. I melted 1 part white cane sugar and 2 parts hot water like Dad suggested. He has a loyal band of hummingbirds that visit throughout the morning, all the way through the evening. When I stay at the apartment at night and sleep on the blow-up bed on the living room floor, the incessant buzzing of their wings outside the window is like a gentle alarm. I figured his recipe must be a little one. Normally, I wouldn't be able to watch for the birds in the morning, wouldn't be able to stare into the backyard uninterrupted. It's this pandemic, you see. It's allowed the privileged part of the world to work from home and relegated much of the working class to joblessness, also taking place in their homes. Depending on the home, I suppose my privilege probably looks like another's laid off. See? I told you both all those sacrifices would pay off. It only took 15 years, 4 moves to 4 different states, missed birthday parties and Easters and summers. missed barbecues, missed Sunday dinners for the true benefit of graduate school and job applications, and so many flights back and forth across the country to pay off. I'm here back on the West Coast with health insurance, a house, backyard, drinking coffee, writing and posting things on a machine neither who understood in life. We have flour and toilet paper. Oh, if you could only have seen the irrational frenzy over toilet paper. I can see both your heads shaking and picture you and your respective lazy boys reading the Merced Sunday Star, keeping track of which stores are stocked and how much and by how much the number of deaths rose in the previous 48 hours, though you'd be watching different 24-hour news channels. Video messaging was the only way to safely see people for months and months. If only I could Zoom with you, or Skype or FaceTime or video chat using the Messenger function in Facebook. However, there is no current technology that allows us to channel with the dead, even though you do not feel any farther away than Mom or Abuela. I suppose neither of them use technology very well either. You'll both be glad to know that I'm cooking one, which I knew you both view as woman's work. My enchilada rolls are less sloppy, my chocolate cake a bit more moist, and I'm experimenting with things you purposefully never ate, like bok choy, Brussels sprouts, and kimchi. But that's it domestically. Despite the threat of continued illness anchoring me home, I'm not really doing anything more in the way of chores, decorating, planting flowers. I have no instinctual desire to birth a human, though some of my friends have decided to. I keep telling you all, I'm pretty terrible at being a woman, at sitting still, at being quiet and nurturing. Neither years on this earth and of money to not live paycheck to paycheck, nor the pandemic has changed this fact. Full disclosure, there's literal dirt under my fingernails right at this moment. Dirt and paint and ink, no polish. I can't stand the sight of the white wounds which lengthen at the end of my nails and cut them as soon as they are past fingertips of skin. Mom shakes her head at this. When I was there for your funeral, Abuelo, just last month, and as I both know, you know, there have been so many funerals. She took my left hand in hers and, frowning slightly, said, "You have your father's hands," which I suppose means these are also your hands too. Love, S. So that letter is one of the rough drafts in this manuscript that I'm currently working on. This is my reference page, so I'm a good academic. And then gracias. Thank you all so very much for being here. I'm happy to answer questions or if you're hungry and just want to. So I'm happy with both. I love chatting and thanks for being here. Thank you for being here. Well, so sometimes with creative policy, I do a workshop on my obituary eulogies and something. So if you ever want to just something.
Yeah, once the poems start getting read, you know, it's like stage.